The Sallie House. Is it truly haunted? And if so, by what? The tragic death of a little girl, occult rituals in the basement, and people being physically injured by spirits. Just what is going on at the Sallie House? On December 31st, 1992, Tony and Deborah Pickman, a newly married couple who were expecting their first child in June, moved into their new home. Located at 508 North 2nd Street in Atchison, Kansas, the house would later become known as the Sallie House. From the moment they moved in, subtle things began occurring. They noticed cold spots around the home. Their landline phone would sporadically drop calls, and lights would flicker. Their dog would also bark at the door of the nursery, acting as if a stranger was in the room. At one point, Tony said jokingly, "Maybe we have a ghost." After the birth of their son, however, things began to escalate. Toys in the nursery would be found in strange locations. Battery-operated toys would turn on by themselves. And one day, while she was vacuuming, Deborah witnessed the wind-up musical mobile start spinning all on its own. It was around this time that a neighbor asked why Deborah was leaving the nursery light on all night. Deborah explained that her baby had been sleeping in their room recently, and so there was no reason for the light to be on. She suggested that perhaps it was a hallway light the neighbor was seeing, but her neighbor insisted that it was the light in the nursery. Plants would die, candles would melt with the wax dripping upwards, and black, sooty fingerprints would be found around the house. Tony reports scratches as well as dreams about Sallie, and even harmful thoughts towards his wife. The house was built for Michael C. Finney between 1867 and 1871. Michael C. Finney, his wife Kate Finney, and their 3 children, James, Agnes, and Charles, lived in the basement of the home during the construction. Michael C. Finney died in the home in 1872, only a year after the construction was completed. Agnes, in 1913, married a man named William True, and the couple lived in the home. William died in the home in 1918. But where does Sallie come into the picture? Legend tells of a young girl whose mother brought her to Dr. Finney's home late one night in a desperate attempt to cure her severe abdominal pain. Believing that Sallie's appendix was on the verge of rupturing, Dr. Finney rushed to perform the emergency surgery before the anesthetic could take hold. However, the procedure failed, and the little girl died. As the story goes, the last thing she saw was the male doctor, and so she hates men, associating them with the doctor that accidentally ended her life. That's why men have reportedly been scratched in the house. Sallie has been dubbed the man-hating ghost. There was also a report of a man falling down the basement stairs to his death. In another version of the story, Dr. Finney, having had an affair with an African-American housemaid, fathered a child, a young girl named Sallie. When she was around 6 or 7, Sallie became ill and needed to have her appendix surgically removed. Yet, fearing the discovery of his illegitimate child, the doctor refused to take her to the hospital. He then began emergency surgery right there in the dining room of the house, as he believed Sallie's appendix was about to rupture. However, he cut into her before the anesthetic could take effect, accidentally killing her as a result. Sallie died under the impression that a man was torturing her. Outraged, her mother attacked the doctor and subsequently was killed too. It is believed that the doctor buried the bodies of Sallie and her mother somewhere in the basement. The doctor fled, but the spirits of Sallie and her mother remain in the house to this day. It is said that Sallie is a happy ghost, often trying to play with the children who move in, while her mother, still grieving her daughter, viciously attacks the adult males who enter the house, which could explain why families rarely stay for very long. There are no newspaper reports or other records to prove that the surgery was ever performed on a little girl, or that she had ever been to the house. It would have to have had happened between 1894 and 1905, as that was the time period when the doctor was living at the residence, 1894 being the year he received his medical license. Denise Pridemore, a tour guide at the residence, has reported being scratched, bruised, and even had a folding chair thrown at her. She believes there is an evil entity residing in the house, along with more mild-tempered spirits. There were a total of 4 deaths reported in the house, none of which were a little girl. On September 27, 1872, at 10 p.m., M.C. Finney passed away in the house. He was only 51. He left behind his pregnant wife, a daughter, and 2 sons. His wife gave birth to a son, Richard Edwin Finney, on May 25, 1873. Sadly, the child would barely survive a year and die on September 29, 1874. William True died in the house in 1918 at the age of 56, and Agnes Finney True died in the house in 1939. James Finney built the house next door, and in 1889 it was deeded to a woman named Joanna Barnes. Joanna, a recently divorced mother of 3, with another baby on the way, was institutionalized in the state hospital of Topeka due to her mental instability, according to the testimonies of her neighbors. In July of 1899, however, Joanna gave birth to her newest bundle of joy, Frank Barnes. She was eventually released from custody to the care of Dr. Finney and returned to the home that he had built. Tragically, on September 24, 1906, Joanna attempted suicide by turning on the gas in a downstairs room and laying down on a cot with her 6-year-old son. The fumes overwhelmed them both, causing them to lose consciousness. Yet Joanna survived, while her son did not. On July 29, 1993, psychic Barbara Connor from California came to the residence and spoke to the spirit. After making contact with the entity, she said the spirit liked to be called Sallie. Then, on October 31, 1993, Halloween, Tony Pickman was in the kitchen of the home grabbing glass from the cupboard, and as he turned around, he saw a little girl standing there. As he describes, she was wearing a white dress, and I remember she had a white ribbon in her hair, kind of like she was dressed for church or something. And then it kicked in. I can see through her. I can see the door right through her. He later made a drawing of the girl, based on what he had seen. A previous resident of the home would later tell them that when he lived there, his 5-year-old daughter had an imaginary friend named Sallie. When his daughter was shown the picture Tony had drawn, she said it looked just like her imaginary friend from when she was a little girl. Tony describes his second encounter with the entity known as Sallie as a bit more disturbing. He said she was tugging at him to get him out of bed, and when he pulled away, she pulled at him harder, and then she grabbed his arm, and her appearance turned into something he described as part animal, part human, having rotting flesh. He remembered seeing worms crawling through her face, and when she growled at him, he thought he was going to pass out. Tony and Deborah Pickman moved out of the house in October of 1994. With all of this compelling evidence, can we conclude that the Sallie House is indeed haunted? According to Dr. Sean Daly, an anthropology professor who did a study on the home, no little girl named Sallie lived in the area at the time. Sally Isabel Hall, who is sometimes associated with the Sallie House, was a patient of Dr. Finney, and although she did die young, she lived long enough to have children of her own before passing away at 34. There are also no medical records of an emergency surgery taking place in the home, nor are there any newspaper accounts or articles. The surgery would have had to have taken place between 1894 when the doctor got his license and 1905 when he moved out of the house. It is purported that the surgery took place in 1905. At that time, at least 4 people were living in the home. Therefore, there would have been witnesses to such a gruesome accident if one had taken place. In 1913, the doctor was elected mayor. Wouldn't it be reasonable to think something of his dark past would have come to light during the election? Unfortunately, we will probably never know. But if the botched surgery didn't actually happen, then who is the little spirit girl haunting the house? Some believe there are darker forces at work in the walls of 508 East 2nd Street. The discovery of a pentagram scrawled on the basement floor led to investigations into possible satanic rituals that were performed in the house, although when and by whom remain unknown. One psychic who visited the site claimed that there was a portal in the home that drew in energies from places beyond our known world. Could this portal have been opened by some ritual? Is Sallie actually an evil spirit merely pretending to be a little girl, using the form of a cute, playful apparition to hide malevolence? What are your thoughts on this controversial location? Is it truly haunted? Let us know in the comments below. And as an interesting side note, what do you think of the fact that the address of the Sallie House, 508 North 2nd Street, is the same as the Villisca murder house located at 508 East 2nd Street, Villisca, Iowa? Perhaps a cosmic coincidence.